Multi-year procurement is incredibly important and one of the most important parts of this bill. When this committee and this Congress funds those things, companies are already breaking ground on tens of billions of dollars of new plants. You name we've got 14 in our ammunition council that we're focusing on certain ammunitions. There are 14 that are critical. You know, PAC-3s, SM-3s, SM-6s, THAADs, Patriots, Tomahawks, AMRAAMs, JASSMs, you name prisms, you name them. We were building them at too slow and too low a level. Now the companies are going to pay for those factories and those production lines. And when Congress gives those 5 to 7 year demand signals, they'll then fund it. Not just, hey, can we get 10 more per month, but can we 2x, 3x, 4x the production, pay for it now, and the companies invest accordingly. So it's been a critical aspect of some of what we've done so far, but we need more of those 5 to 7 year investments.
Great. General Kane, what does the $1.5 trillion budget mean for the warfighter and our ability to project forces and secure our interests around the globe?
Chairman, in my view, this represents a historic down payment on future security. If the budget is approved and ultimately deployed, as we look at the character of warfare changing very, very fast, what's layered in to this budget by our civilian leaders will allow us to start getting ahead of where technology is evolving. And as I mentioned, the character of warfighting is changing pretty quickly. Mass, simultaneity, autonomy, undersea, space, cyber, information, all of those ways that are now manifesting themselves on the battlefields around the world require a higher end of capital investment, and that's why we're grateful for the opportunity to have this budget make its way to the joint force. So it's an important down payment on the future here, sir.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
With that, I yield to the ranking member for any questions he may have.
Thank you. Mr. Hurst, drag you into the conversation here. We have not yet received from the Pentagon the costs of the war. So just for the record, we'd like to get that as soon as possible. Certainly the munitions expended, but also underreported is we've had a fair amount of equipment destroyed, including 2 C-130s with the rescue of our downed airmen. So do you have either A, a cost estimate coming to us anytime soon, or B, a specific supplemental request?
Thank you for that question. So approximately at this day, we're spending about $25 billion on Operation Epic Fury. Most of that is munitions. There's part of that is obviously O&M and equipment replacement. We will formulate a supplemental through the White House that will come to Congress once we have a full assessment of the cost of the conflict.
So you're saying the full cost at this point is $25 billion?
Yeah, that's our estimate for the cost.
Okay. Interesting, because I'm glad you answered that question, because we've been asking for a hell of a long time and no one's given us the number. So if you could get those details over to us, that would be great. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned the nuclear aspect of Iran and the war. And it is worth noting that every president prior to this one, including President Trump in his first term, also prevented Iran from getting a nuclear weapon without actually having to go to war in Iran. So we need to keep that in mind. But also, since the war started, Iran's nuclear arsenal has not been weakened in any way. And at the moment, in negotiations, what Iran is saying, basically pay us to open up the strait. That's their position, which is completely untenable. I agree. It's worth noting, of course, that the strait was open before the war started. Now we're negotiating to get back to status quo. And Iran's most recent offer is to say, we'll talk about nukes later. So what is the plan to actually turn all of this lethal kinetic action into an improvement in the nuclear situation? Because we haven't gotten there yet. Play it out for us. How does that happen? How does it actually lead to that result?
Well, I would take issue with the premise of the question that nothing was done. Operation Midnight Hammer was a very effective.
Well, I didn't say nothing was done. I said in this war.
Ultimately,
this war started.
this under this administration, unlike other administrations, which cut bad deals and pallets of cash with no ability to oversee whether Iran is actually pursuing a nuclear program.
Which is where we're at.
If we want to litigate JCPOA or the Iran deal, our view, the president's views, that was a very bad deal.
Okay.
It gave them a bunch of money up
for
front.
the future.
To fund, you talked about negotiated deals. Allowed them to fund their proxies and spread Hamas and Hezbollah all around the region, build up nuclear capabilities.
What are we going to do now?
President Trump has been clear-eyed, from the killing of Qasem Soleimani to the pulling out of the Iran deal to Midnight Hammer and now to this effort to recognize that you have to stare down this kind of enemy who's hell-bent on getting a nuclear weapon and get them to a point where they're at the table giving it up in a way that
So they
never have it.
So they haven't broken yet. Okay, we haven't gotten there yet for all of the.
Well, their nuclear facilities have been obliterated. Underground, they're buried, and we're watching them 24/7. So we know where any nuclear material
Reclaiming
might
my
be.
time for
We're
a
watching
quick
it.
second here. We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated?
They had not given up their nuclear ambitions, and they had a conventional shield of thousands
So
of missiles.
Operation Midnight
They're at the
Hammer
weakest
accomplished
moment.
nothing of substance. It
You're
left us
missing-
at
you're
exactly
missing
the
the
same
point.
place we were before. So
Their,
much so
their
that we had to
facilities
start
were
a
bombed
war.
and obliterated. Their ambitions continued, and they're building a conventional shield.
All right,
of
let me
missiles.
try again.
It's the North Korea strategy. You know this very well. The North
I
Korea
know.
strategy was use conventional missiles to prevent anybody from challenging them so they could slow walk their way to a weapon. President Trump saw Iran at its weakest moment, took an action to ensure, in a way that only the United States of America could do with our Israeli partners,
And yet
to
they
ensure their
still haven't given
conventional
up the nuclear.
shield was
All right.
brought
One
to
other
field, which
question,
we've done.
if I could get to it. So on Ukraine, a year plus ago, your advice, the president's advice, was Ukraine had no cards to play. They should go cut the best possible deal they could. Clearly, that was wrong. What did you miss? What did you miss about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine that you didn't see that Ukraine was going to be capable of doing what they've done in the last 14 months?
What we didn't miss, and we're here in this committee, is that Joe Biden, with no accountability, gave hundreds of billions of dollars of our weapons to Ukraine, to an outcome that never would have happened if President Trump was president. So he pulled out our. You guys don't talk about that. Ultimately, President Trump believes there should be a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine.
But you didn't expect Ukraine to be where they're at right now. I'm asking you, just from a strategic standpoint, what
I
did
think the
you miss?
Ukrainians have shown great courage, and I appreciate that Europe is now paying for any weapons that we provide.
All right, I yield back. Thank you.
All right, now I want to remind everybody, everybody wants to get their questions, so we are going to be sticking strictly to the 5-minute rule today. So with that, I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman Mike Rogers, for your leadership working with President Donald Trump. As the grateful father of 4 sons who've served overseas in Iraq, Egypt, and Afghanistan, I especially appreciate War Secretary Saith and Chief of Staff Kane for your competence, service, and success. Military families have never been more appreciated than today, and our enemies of dictators now understand peace through strength. Dictators historically are on the run. With your leadership, President Trump has given Syria a chance with President al-Shara replacing dictator Assad from Damascus, who now lives in Moscow. Dictator Maduro is correctly in a Manhattan jail, as you successfully revealed in Caracas that the war criminal Putin air defenses do not work, the Chinese Communist Party radar failed, and Cuban mercenaries were expendable. The Cuban dictatorship is failing, and the ultimate mass murderer, dictator Khomeini, is dead in Tehran, Iran, joining the 35,000 people he murdered this year. With your leadership, American morale has never been higher, and hopes for freedom of the oppressed people of Iran, Cuba, Russia, and China have never been higher. And it's just an exciting time to be here with you. And Mr. Secretary, we continue to see the growing nuclear threat of our adversaries as they expand their capabilities, with the largest military buildup in peacetime in world history by the Chinese Communist Party. How critical is it that we continue, as at the Savannah River site in South Carolina, to develop the plutonium pit processing so that we have modernization?
Well, Congressman, I appreciate that question. On nuclear modernization, this budget funds $71 billion to modernize the triad in ways that we had neglected to do. And our nuclear triad underwrites everything. But I really appreciate your opening statement. I think something that obviously the media doesn't want to cover and doesn't want to talk about is the historic record-breaking surge in recruiting in our ranks. 30-year record in recruiting of Americans wanting to join our joint force, wanting to put the uniform on. We're meeting recruiting goals halfway through the year. We couldn't meet our recruiting goals under the previous administration. Under Joe Biden, Americans didn't want to join the military. We couldn't get it. Now we have to turn people away and push them to the next fiscal year. That's why this budget grows our force by almost 50,000. Ultimately, additional troops into the force that we believe we can recruit. That's the best vote of confidence I can imagine.
Well,
The
hey,
American people, and
even
not
better,
just
hey,
recruiting,
Mr.
it's also
Secretary,
retention.
you're really understating. Leaving no airmen behind. Hey, what an inspiration on Easter Day. God bless y'all and what you've achieved. With that in mind, too, General Kane, with your VMI military perspective, War Colonel Putin is losing in Ukraine as his 30-day special mission is now 4 years of, as the Secretary has identified, courageous Ukrainian success led by President Vladimir Zelensky. I appreciate that NATO and the EU have unified for Ukraine as the U.S. ranks 17th per GDP in assistance for Ukraine. Ukraine is frontline, stopping War Colonel Putin from resurrecting the failed Soviet Union, rigging elections in Belarus, invading Ukraine, keeping troops in Moldova, and with the Indivashvili invading and rigging elections in the Republic of Georgia. As we're transitioning greater responsibility to our NATO allies, how do we ensure seamless integration to deterrence during this shift?
Congressman, we're very fortunate to have great leaders out in the European theater right now. General Grinkovich and his leadership team are committed to ensuring that integration and transition takes place in a most combat capable and effective way. Very entrepreneurial leaders out there across the components, and with General Grinkovich, and he's doing a great job out there, as the committee knows.
And indeed, as we conclude, historically, President Trump, Mr. Secretary General, you have united the Middle East nations unprecedented to ally with the United States. You have united Latin America unprecedented to ally with the United States. You've united the Indo-Pacific unprecedented to ally with the United States, and united NATO and EU unprecedented to ally with the United States. You're achieving peace and deterrence through strength. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary and General Kane, this morning's Wall Street Journal's lead headline reads, quote, Trump tells aides to prepare for an extended blockade of Iran. It goes on to describe, again, the thinking behind the strategy, but also talks about how prolonging the blockade is going to continue to drive up energy costs all over the world. Given the ever-changing messages from this administration on the war strategy and timeline, I really honestly don't expect you to confirm or deny the Journal story. But one thing is clear. The number of transits across the Strait of Hormuz has dropped to the lowest level since the war began, and commodity markets have stopped listening to the happy talk, and crude oil prices this morning had risen to the highest level since the war in Ukraine started in 2022. AAA reported this morning that the average price of gas is $4.30 a gallon, up 30 cents in 1 week. Diesel's average is $5.45. My friend Mr. Garamendi says in California it's closer to $8 a gallon. And fertilizer prices have also hammered farmers at exactly the same time they're beginning planting all across the country. Aside from the damage this war has done to American consumers, farmers, and small businesses, I want to focus for a minute on the cost of the war and our military readiness, particularly to other combatant commands. Mr. Secretary, you put out a national defense strategy in January, which listed the threat assessment facing our country. China was number one, with the second largest, most powerful military in the world, of course. Russia's nuclear force clearly was number two in terms of the threat they pose to the homeland. North Korea, which has missiles that actually can reach U.S. territory, was ranked number three, and Iran was described as, quote, and accurately after Midnight Hammer, that Iran's regime is weaker and more vulnerable than it has been in decades. Again, this was before February 28th, when the decision was made to go into the military strikes on Iran. So today we have 3 carrier strike forces in Central Command. The Indo-PACOM, which is where Russia and China are operating their navies, 52% of the globe. We have 1 carrier strike group in Japan, George Washington. and the imbalance in terms of just what our commitments and frankly what our national defense strategy is just blindingly obvious in terms of what this war is doing. Gerald Ford is on day 312 of its deployment. They've gone through fires, plumbing problems, and again an extended deployment, which in my opinion is hitting readiness as hard as anything I've seen in the time that I've been on this committee. So, General Kane, in terms of again the carrier strike groups that are over there, assuming that we get to some end game here, Ford is not going over to the Indo-Pacific to buttress the gap that exists there today. They've got to go back into pretty heavy repair and availability in terms of trying to recover from their deployment. So again, in terms of just the decisions about where we're putting people and putting really the most powerful part of our Navy, can you explain again what that means in terms of the situation in Indo-PACOM, where China is watching? We saw Mr. Rogers' pretty powerful presentation in terms of the buildup that's happening in that part of the world. How does that align with the national defense strategy, which was just put out by this administration in January?
Well, sir, first I want to echo your comments on the Ford Strike Group. Fantastic work by incredible sailors, not just the Ford herself, but the other ships as well, on a historic cruise doing incredible work for the nation.
But excuse me, how does that balance with the national?
Well, yes, sir. Happy to answer the way I think about this. The national security strategy and national defense strategy are frameworks, but a president will employ national force and power based on the political and security situations that a president deems appropriate to use that military force. There's always trade-offs in all of these things. I'm confident that the president always carefully considers these readiness trade-offs, and I'm sure he has done so in this case based on the military options that we've presented with the associated risks and advice.
To make a trade going after a regime that's weaker and more vulnerable than it has been in decades, which is quote unquote from the Defense Strategies report, does not, in my opinion, in common sense.
Gentleman's time's expired. As you can tell from looking at the dais, votes have been called, so we are now going to stand in recess to the end of this vote. I expect it to take 20 to 25 minutes, but we are now in recess.
And so, as you heard, a break in this hearing to allow members of the House Armed Services Committee to come to vote on this procedural motion pertaining to the upcoming debate on 5 bills, including a FISA surveillance authority extension past Thursday's midnight deadline. The Senate approved GOP budget resolution to fund ICE and CBP, and reauthorization of a farm bill for 5 years. If the House here votes to move on to debate this legislation, they'll first need to approve the rules guiding the debate, and we do expect to see that vote next. So while votes continue to come in here, we're going to take you back to the beginning of testimony this morning from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair General Dan Kane. They're appearing before the House Armed Services Committee on the department's 2027 budget request.
And thank them for their service to our nation. We are meeting today to review the Pentagon's FY27 budget request. Each year, the budget presentation gives us the opportunity to take a hard look at the threats we face and our ability to deter and defeat them. It helps us decide on a level of investment that will actually secure our homeland and protect our interests across the globe. Here are the facts that underlie this year's budget request. We are confronting an unprecedented global threat environment with multiple adversaries working together to undermine our security and that of our allies. They are building alliances and supporting each other with drones, munitions, missile technology, and energy supplies. And China is leading the charge against us. As you can see from this graphic, 25 years ago, the PLA was just a defensive force with little ability to project power beyond their borders. Today, The PLA is a modernized military force capable of projecting power well into the Pacific. Their rapid military buildup has delivered thousands of new ships, subs, missiles, and space assets that severely challenge our ability to safeguard our national security interest in the Indo-Pacific. China continues to invest heavily in the PLA's military modernization, announcing another 7% increase in defense spending this year. As a result, they are spending more of their GDP on defense than we are. In fact, as you can see from this graphic, all of our adversaries are spending more of their GDP on defense than we are. Meanwhile, our defense spending as a percentage of GDP has been steadily falling since World War II. That yellow line that you see on the graph cutting across that bar represents 4 to 5% of GDP spending. History has shown that meeting or exceeding that level of investment ensures we can truly deter our adversaries. That's also the level of investment we're asking our allies to make. But for years, we've chosen not to make that same level of investment ourselves. Since World War II, defense spending has shrunk significantly as a percentage of federal outlays, as you can see from the red line on that chart. Nonetheless, non-defense spending, on the other hand, accounts for over 85%, and it's been increasing for that same period of time. This underinvestment in our defense has had very real consequences. Our defense industrial base, long the envy of the world, has atrophied significantly. We're no longer capable of manufacturing for our warfighters at scale or speed. Just look at shipbuilding. China builds 47% of the world's ships. The U.S. builds 0.1%. We build fewer ships than Croatia or the Netherlands. Our global munition stockpiles are low, and we lack the capacity to rapidly restock magazine depth. We have very little industrial capacity to mine, refine, or process critical minerals. As a result, many of our defense supply chains are reliant on the very adversaries we seek to deter. Beyond the impact to our industrial base, the inadequate investment in our defense has resulted in a vicious cycle that has pitted sustainment against modernization. For years, administration after administration comes to this committee with budgets asking us to decommission weapon systems that they admit we still need, or to cut funding for training, parts, and supplies, or to put off needed maintenance to the facilities where our service members live and work, or to reduce the number of military personnel. These budgets have asked us to make these sacrifices and accept the near-term risk so we could afford to reinvest in military modernization, which is something we desperately need to do. But we in Congress consistently rejected this mutually exclusive choice. Instead, we divided up the limited budget we were given and made a worse choice. We underfunded both sustainment and modernization. The result is we don't have enough munitions, ships, aircraft, or autonomous systems to ensure dominance against every adversary. And the ships and aircraft we do have suffer from unacceptably low mission-capable rates. Fortunately, that's about to change. This president has requested a historic $1.5 trillion budget for our national defense. For the first time in over 40 years, we've been presented a budget that accounts for the true cost of American deterrence. This budget fully funds both sustainment and modernization. It provides a 24% increase in operation and maintenance, including a 20% increase in core readiness programs like flight hours and combat exercises. It includes a 115% increase in funding to repair and improve facilities for our service members and their families. It increases military end strength by 44,000 and provides for a historic pay raise for our service members. It calls for an unprecedented 76% increase in procurement and 64% increase in research and development. This will enable us to truly catch up in our modernization efforts by quickly fielding new munitions, aircraft, ships, land, space, and autonomous systems to replenish and expand our arsenal. It directly confronts the challenges in our defense industrial base, with over $100 billion in investments to revitalize manufacturing, expand domestic and allied critical minerals projects, and secure our supply chains. Finally, this level of investment gets defense back to 4.5%. That's where we need to be. We want to truly deter conflict. It also ensures that America leads by example as our allies heed the President's call to increase their defense spending and improve their military readiness. I would also note that it's critical that we do not reduce deterrence while we're asking our allies to ramp up their own capacity. And that's something we're going to be paying a lot of attention to in this committee. Before I close my remarks, I want to highlight the bravery, dedication, and professionalism of our warfighters throughout this conflict with Iran. Their tremendous work to achieve the very clear military objectives of this operation has given the President the opening he needs to negotiate a true and lasting peace that will ensure Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon. Mr. Secretary, General Kane, thank you for being here. I look forward to hearing how this budget request will ensure our military can preserve American deterrence for generations to come. And with that, I yield to my friend, the ranking member, for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate those opening remarks. I want to start by agreeing with you on the last point. Our troops have performed incredibly well in the last 15 months. They have been asked to do more than anyone expected, and they have demonstrated the incredible capability of the United States military. I think we should all recognize that. Even if we question the strategy, some of the decisions behind it, our troops deserve nothing but our praise for the incredible job that they have done.
I
It has
agree
not
with
been
that.
perfect. Certainly mistakes have been made, but we have demonstrated to the world that we have a highly capable military. And I hear the chairman on the need for an increased budget. I think there's a whole lot of needs across the United States of America that would have the same attitude about health care, about education, about infrastructure. But the problem is we have a $40 trillion debt, and we insist on cutting taxes for absolutely everybody, so we reduce the amount of revenue that is available to that. We also have to have a national security strategy that lives within a sound fiscal picture. Most experts would say that the most profound threat to our national security right now is exactly that. Is our fiscal picture. How are we going to continue to be able to afford to fund the things we need to fund as we run the debt ever higher? The other thing worth worrying about is the Pentagon has not yet passed an audit. If we give them what is roughly a 50 to 60% increase, is that money going to be well spent? We have every reason to doubt that. Now, I will say, and I praise the chairman, this committee, and in a bipartisan, bicameral way, we have tackled the problem of acquisition reform. I think last year's bill put us on a good trajectory to get to the point where we can, in fact, innovate faster at scale. I also believe the Pentagon has been working on that. We've had many meetings with Deputy Secretary Feinberg, who is focused on that, but we got a long way to go. Can the Pentagon really absorb another $500-600 billion, depending on what the supplemental and the reconciliation package are? I don't think so. We need to pay as much attention to how we're spending the money as to how much we're spending, and we never seem to do that. But the larger problem is the strategy that has been put before us. I looked through the Secretary's remarks, and I've heard you give speeches before about this, about how realism is our strategy. And I find that absurd, and given what we are doing. You can say a lot of things about the strategy, but calling it realistic? We started a full-scale war in the Middle East against Iran to try to reshape the Middle East. Now, we can talk about that in a bunch of different ways, but it is the exact opposite of realism. And in fact, starting wars in the Middle East that get out of control and lead us to have far greater costs for the benefits is one of the cornerstones of the unrealistic strategy that this administration has criticized over and over and over again. And yet here we are in a full-scale Mideast war, and we've seen the costs of that. Certainly at the top of that list is 13 service members killed and hundreds wounded, but it goes way beyond that. That thousands of civilians have been killed. Over a dozen countries now have been dragged into this war in one way or another. The Israel-Lebanon war has exploded since this war started. We now have a conflict between the Shia militias in Iraq and Kurdistan that is straining, to put it mildly, our relationship with Iraq, and also causing greater chaos throughout the Middle East. We see the impact on the economy. Certainly here at home, gas prices up by over $1. The impact of the fertilizer increase is going to come later.
The yeas are 215 and the nays are 210. The previous question is ordered. The question is the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Sure.
Gentleman is recognized.
Ask for a recorded vote.
Gentleman has asked for a recorded vote. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the recorded vote is offered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. 5-minute vote.
And so members now voting on whether to approve a set of debate rules covering 5 measures. It includes several notable bills, including FISA surveillance authority extensions. Past Thursday's midnight deadline, the Senate approved GOP budget resolution to fund ICE and CBP and reauthorization of the Farm Bill for 5 years. According to CQ, the rule, which was approved in committee on Tuesday evening, would allow votes on 57 amendments to the Farm Bill, including on pesticide lawsuits. It also separates out contentious biofuels blending language into a freestanding bill that could be tacked onto the Farm Bill if it's approved. The rule also attaches a central bank digital currency ban measure to the FISA extension. Senate Majority Leader John Thune has already said he's opposed to this particular provision.
I'm going to weigh in on what you've been listening to here pertaining to different issues about voting in this and doing that. They're just going to verify this particular vote right here. Going back to the $1.5 trillion that they're asking for going to the Pentagon. What I'm hearing, this is my personal understanding, what I'm hearing does not sound good to the extreme that it actually sounds like a group of people that's panicking. Now, you can take it for what it's worth in what you're hearing, but whenever they're assessing all these things and they're realizing a country that is already $40 trillion, we are basically driving ourselves off into the oblivion of bankruptcy. And my friends, if you don't have money, you don't have power. If you don't have maneuverability, you actually stand a greater chance in becoming defeated, more so than defeating your enemies. Now that's just my opinion about it, that they're starting to freak out and identifying just exactly how far that this thing has gotten out of tune.
Defensive alliance. What that means is every country in it pledges to defend a country if attacked. And when we were attacked on 9/11, that's what NATO did. They put in Article 5, and for 20 years they fought beside us. NATO is not if any one of the countries decides to unilaterally and unwisely start a war precipitously that everyone else is supposed to join. That's not the way it works. So berating and belittling our allies after we did that and driving them ever further away from us, how is that realistic? Not only are we going to try to reshape the Middle East, but we're going to do it alone while we're pushing everybody away from us. And then we have other tools in our arsenal. You see that those numbers on the budget, but the State Department's really important. Development is really important. These are ways to achieve our ends, and we have moved away from that. We got rid of the entire USAID, literally causing the starvation of children in countries where we had pledged to provide food, causing massive healthcare disruptions, people literally dying because we cut that off. In diplomacy, we have sidelined, again, the entire world. France and the UK have brought together 44 different countries that have an interest in trying to open up the Strait of Hormuz. We've pushed them all aside. And then we've even pushed aside our own diplomatic corps. We have a very, very talented State Department. I praise today the talent of our military, and I will stand by that. They deserve that praise. Our diplomatic corps deserves that praise too. But we've shoved them all to the side in favor of 2 real estate guys who are going to go negotiate all the deals in the world, which to date, by the way, has yielded exactly nothing. So there's nothing realistic about starting a war in the Middle East, going it alone, and pushing aside all diplomacy and all development and all other tools in our arsenal. And on top of that, of course, we also want to dominate the entire Western Hemisphere, including apparently annexing Canada and invading Greenland. How is any of that realistic? And then the administration comes before us and asks for what is a hopelessly unrealistic budget in this environment. Back on that chart there, when we were showing how much money we were spending on defense, we had a balanced budget. We had a surplus many years. We don't have that anymore. So call this strategy whatever you want to call it, but please don't call it realism. It's not. Forgive me, it reminds me of one of my favorite lines from A Princess Bride. It's a tense warning. I want to lighten it up a little bit. But the guy keeps saying inconceivable when things happen. And finally the guy says to him, you keep using that word. I don't think you know what it means. I don't think we know what the word realism means. So please, can we not have the realism conversation? Let's have the conversation about what the strategy actually is. And I'm sure you have a different definition of it than I do. But as I look at it, the strategy seems to be to use as much violence, as much threats, as much coercion as possible to bend the world to our will. I think that is a very dangerous strategy because one of the oldest cliches in the military is the enemy gets a vote. And we may think that we can stand up and talk tough and talk about how strong we are and how we're burying our enemies and they're begging for a deal. We can do that all day long, all right? But the enemy gets a vote. They don't have to do what we tell them to do. And meanwhile, that coercive, violent strategy undermines our credibility in the world because the chairman is absolutely right. And this is one area where I strongly disagree with the folks on the far left who say that we don't really face any threats, that the U.S. is a malign influence in the world and always has been. I don't agree with that. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, variety of other transnational terrorist groups, including, yes, narco-terrorists and human traffickers over here. They all are trying to weaken us, all right? They don't want a rules-based order. They want to play by their own rules. They want to push us aside. We want to be the side that stands up for the rules. But if what we're saying to the rest of the world is stick with us because we're a better bully than China, we coerce countries more effectively, that undercuts the very message we're trying to spread to build the coalition we need to be successful. I also worry about the values that we're showing the world. When the president threatens to kill off an entire civilization, that is the message coming out of the United States of America. If we are going to be this big, powerful force that throws our weight around the world wants to know at a minimum that we're doing it for the right reasons and with a sense of values to protect people, not to destroy entire civilizations. And we all hear that and we all go, well, gosh, he probably doesn't mean it. Well, that is so reassuring, okay, that he's just making it up. We're supposed to be the United States of America. I grew up on stories of the U.S. at the end of World War II being the country that the Germans wanted to surrender to, not the Russians, because they knew they could trust our values. We don't seem to care about those values. No rules of engagement. Give them no quarter, all right? That is not who we are supposed to be. And just one final point on that, the girls' school that got hit in the first days of this war. There is absolutely no question at this point what happened. We made a mistake, and that happens in war. We identified this target based on earlier charts, and yet 2 months after it happened, we refused to say anything about it, giving the world the impression that we just don't care. We do not care about the casualties and the chaos that is caused by our war, and we should care, even if we want to prosecute that war. Now, I agree with the chairman. We need a strategy. We face the most complex threat environment that we face in a very, very long time. So we really want to hear from the administration. Don't give us this realism, chest-thumping stuff. What are we really going to do to meet those threats, to deal with the challenges we face? And I'll close just by saying one of the other ironies of this, of course, is we have a great example in the world right now of what our strategy should be and where our values should be. And that's Ukraine. And I'm really curious, here we are, we roll out the red carpet for Vladimir Putin. We belittle and insult President Zelensky in the White House. He has no cards, right? Well, here we are a year after that. Looks like he had a couple cards to play. Because Ukraine is actually winning against Russia. Ukraine, a sovereign democracy standing up against a brutal, oppressive, coercive dictatorship. And we can't even bring ourselves on a consistent basis to say, we are with Ukraine and we are against what Putin is doing, and stand up and support them. So I want to see that strategy to meet the complex threat environment that we have. But simply saying we've already won and boasting and bragging and trying to belittle and insult the entire world, that's not going to get us to the posture that we need. So I hope we have a conversation about how we can build a strategy that makes sense and is actually realistic. With that, I yield back.
All right, this is based around practicality. You heard that word once or twice, along with 4 or 5 other different words that basically mean the same thing as far as having a basic strategy, a good strategy, especially a country that's already $40 trillion in debt. This is not good. None of this is good. And I'm going to tell you something else that I was going to say a while ago. In having these type of meetings that get issued out to the world, basically all we're doing is advertising, laundering, putting out our shingle regarding where we stand, not only with each other, but where we stand with the world. And to be advertising to our enemies this way, to me, is absolutely bizarre. If you do have a problem with the finance department or the Pentagon or any other part of defense, should you actually be telling your enemies this? That's not the proper way of going about trying to be superior when it becomes a superiority. I don't think. This is just my opinion. Now, I'm going to share one more other thing, and I'm try to shorten this as much as I can pertaining to the severity of all this. With them trying to cover up that in which what occurred in 9/11 pertaining to Saudi Arabia. What Saudi Arabia is fixing to do right now is break away from one of the biggest oil producing manufacturers over there in the Middle East, pertaining to them either not being loyal or maybe they've decided to go on their own. To me, is shocking. It's absolutely shocking, because what they're going to do is not only harm and hurt America by doing this based upon supply and demand, knowing it good and well whenever they do this, it's not only going to hurt us, but it's going to hurt basically the whole world. We have seen now, visually, tangibly seen, of the Strait Hormuz, in how vital and how crucial of shutting down that artery actually is, looking at it from a global standpoint. Well, now, the Saudis that did mastermind 9/11 are going to put forth their depletion of agony that much more by basically, I guess, trying to dismantle that in which what we thought was a secure investment over there. Now, I've heard bits and pieces coming from social media one way or the other, and a lot of that stuff you got to take with a grain of salt, because you really don't know whether or not it's so or not, or whether or not they're just saber rattling, or whether or not they're just talking out of their hat. But this that was announced yesterday towards OPEC is a very, very serious stance when it comes to the global universal society. I'm like everybody else whenever it comes to your environmentalist, whenever it comes to global warming. I know, and I know that a lot of other people know, that what we're doing to this planet, which is basically dismantling or taking away 1 billion barrels of oil a day. a day. That's a rough cut, the way that I understand it. A day. That if you continue to manufacture more automobiles and you continue to dig more wells and you continue to drain more oil out of the ground by stealing the resources from the ground that was put there, I believe, for a heat shield, eventually we are going to self-destruct. Because global warming and environmental changes are, in fact, real. And until we come to that conclusion, we're going to continue to keep digging our own graves. I'm going to say it one more time. We're going to continue to keep digging our own graves. And what's even worse than that is that we're not only digging our graves, but we're digging everybody else's graves along with it. There was a time whenever the Democratic Party was, I think, on cue in trying to dismantle the oil tycoons, in trying to resort to alternative energy. But now, since Donald Trump has gotten power, all of a sudden, I heard yesterday that he's actually proposing a $800 billion, not million, $billion proposal of all these people that's making turbines, all these people that's making alternative energy sources, regardless whether it be hybrid, regardless whether it be wind, regardless whether it be solar panels, to stop. Stop. Offer them money to shut it down. That way we can use more oil. That way we can dig our graves a little earlier. Now, I don't know what the hell's going on pertaining to all this, because I'm not the smartest or the sharpest knife in the drawer. But I will say this. What various politicians has done, beginning right here in Northwest Tennessee and Washington, D.C., what they have done going back 30 plus years, almost 40 years now. Actually, it has been 40 years since I made contact with the White House whenever I made the first telephone call to the White House about the Antichrist and about the New World Order and the One World Government. What these people have done, including preachers as well as politicians, will give an account for this one day. You know why? Because there'll be a reckoning. It may not be in this world. It may not be in this lifetime. But there'll be a reckoning. And some of these people that I'm talking about, like Mr. Senior Bush and like Mr. Senior Ronald Reagan, they've already died and passed on. So it ain't like it you can grab them up out of the grave and all of a sudden give accountability to them in this lifetime. But I guarantee you, in the lifetime to come, they will be held accountable for what that they either done, that they shouldn't have done, or what they didn't do, that they should have done. Either or. We're on a trajectory course right now of doom and gloom, the way that I understand it. And finally, it's got out of control to the degree that it's put a burr under somebody's saddle that they're just now acknowledging by having these type of meetings while they're begging for a $1.5 trillion more money to go to the Pentagon. Now, once again, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I've identified by reading the scriptures pertaining to it was as the noise of thunder. Didn't say it was thunder, but as the noise of thunder towards the recourse going on down here on the planet Earth, that one of the beasts said, "Come and see, for there went out a white horse that had a crown, that had a bow, that was given a crown, that went forth conquering and to conquer." The way that this government has been trying to conquer and to conquer over its enemies has been politically, has been monetarily. And to this day, it is still just as wrong today as what it was going back into 1988 whenever 9 cassette tapes wound up on the president's doorstep pertaining to Ronald Reagan. What we're doing is agitating our allies, and what we're doing is bringing awareness to our adversaries pertaining to our weaknesses. And don't think for 1 second that they're not sitting down and documenting all this stuff towards basically going to do a pile on. And if they can't come after us one way in trying to defeat us, they'll come at us in another way toward trying to defeat us. And at the end of the day, we're just now realizing that we're not quite as invincible as what we thought. And now we're advertising it to our adversaries. How freaking much stupider can you become by telling your adversary your weaknesses? This is all based around a rejection, a resistance, rejection coming from the corporate church world and coming from the political world right here in the good old USA towards them not truly supporting the individual that's standing in behind the camera right now talking pertaining to the Jesus Christ Jubilees Windmill Ministries missions that my son and I went to all the Congress in 1989 and passed out material in explaining to them that the first seal of Revelations had been opened. At the end of the day, and whenever I'm talking about the end of the day, I'm just not talking about the end of our lives. I'm talking about the end of civilization as we know it, pertaining to whenever God shall recreate a new heaven and a new earth. At the end of the day, I promise you, and I promise those that have any type of belief whatsoever in what I'm talking about, that the truth will be revealed and the truth will prevail. And if it doesn't prevail in this lifetime, it will prevail in the lifetime to come, pertaining to who was telling who the truth the whole time. Now, you can snuggle up your noses and you can degrade, demoralize, you can demonize, dehumanize all you want. You can continue to give the old boy in Northwest Tennessee the cold shoulder. But as you're doing it, I want you to recognize the damages that are being exploited. Dresden, Tennessee, Martin, Tennessee, Weakley County, Tennessee, Obion County, Tennessee, Kenton, Tennessee. I want you to recognize the damages that you have done by doing this, that there will be accountability issues that will come up. And if it don't come up in this lifetime, it will come up in the lifetime to come towards just exactly the trajectory that you have placed our national security defenses on, beginning at the White House with Homeland Security Secret Service that tried desperately to stop the individual that's talking behind the camera. And those that think, well, we hadn't done nothing to Mr. Jackson towards interfering with his ministry, that's just it. You haven't done nothing. And by you not doing nothing makes you part of the problem instead of the solution to it. Am I talking to dead trees? Am I talking to stiff necks to the degree that the intelligent level here in America has dropped so low that they either can't understand or refuses to understand? Because I promise you, when it comes to the understandable accountability, there will be a full circle. That one day we will all sit at that big table and have to give an account towards everything that we have done, just like everything that we didn't do that we know that we should have done. I'm tired. I'm being worn out. I've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars and thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, not just on social media, but before even social media ever existed, towards basically going through the steps of wearing out 3 or 4 different vehicles, including myself, not counting all the material that I put out there. And I'm still not becoming or getting any type of acknowledgement from the corporate church world that wants to preach one thing out of one side of their mouth, but the other side of their mouth wants to do something completely, totally different. Playing both sides against the middle. You cannot do this and think that you're going to get away with this. You can do this in bringing hardship to the world, especially to ourselves, especially to the lives of the innocent. And you can try to blame this upon me or blame it upon other people, but the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, which once more, at the end of civilization as we know it, people will give an account, including myself, towards what has been said and what has been done. Just as much as what hadn't been said, as much as what hadn't been done. Now, you can accuse me of being long-winded all you like, but the fact of the matter is, I have set severely by in trying to give out desperate warnings, desperate advisories again and again and again towards telling people these things that's either been ignored or ridiculed towards being demonized and dehumanized over. I've got friends right now that wishes that this was over with. I've got friends right now that's going through such psychological suffering, not counting their physical suffering, not counting being broke. Did you know that there's less, that they claim out of as many people we have in America, that over a third of them has less than $400 in their bank accounts, living from one day to another, from one week to another? Is anybody aware of that? Is anybody aware of how many businesses just in the agriculture communities within the past 5 years that has had to go bankrupt? Does anybody have any idea towards all the mama papa businesses out there that are basically shutting down every day because they can't make ends meet? You know why they can't make ends meet? It's because somebody decided to create a computer called the internet. And now people has caught on to the middleman having to charge so much money, but even though they're going to the same vendor, which is somebody over in Korea or somebody over in a sweatshop down in South America, and now you can go online and get that same product for basically pennies on a dollar. And you wonder what's happening to our political business sector? It's going under. We're in the red. We're in over our heads. And if you can't identify that right now, then something is entirely wrong with your practicality reasoning of reality. God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless our endeavors. But from what I'm seeing coming from the human race down here, they're the ones that's jinking us. They're the ones that's bringing a curse upon to us. And they're the ones that refuses to do the proper and right things at a country that's $40+ trillion now in debt. I rest my case. God bless and shalom. Good luck to all of us, because I promise you we're going to need it.